So we're taking a look at the second half of 1776, beginning with the question, okay, independence. What exactly does it mean for most Americans? Well, in the immediate aftermath of the Siege of Boston and the publication of Common Sense, there are a lot of Americans that are going to start to lose hope that the war is going to end quickly. So keeping the Continental Army together and counting on the support of the people is really going to be a struggle. Now, there's a famous quote from John Adams that says, "We are about 1/3 Tories," which Tories is another way of saying supporting the British, 1/3 timid, which means neutral, and 1/3 true blue, meaning patriots. And, you can see on the map that we have loyalist strongholds. They controlled the cities. With the exception of Boston, pretty much every city came under loyalist control at some point. Now, the key: Patriot strongholds. The Patriots control the countryside, and they can have as many cities as they want, the British can, but it doesn't hold a candle to the fact that even at this stage, America is pretty darn big, and there's a whole lot of country that's going to be real difficult to conquer. Now, we see some areas in purple, strongly contested areas. This is where some of the fiercest fighting of the entire war is going to take place. Now, we see a nice image of General Washington. Now, what are some of the problems he has to deal with? We've got a Congress that lacks the power of taxation. So, with no power of taxation, that simply means no money to pay the troops. We also have the fact that the actual troop numbers fluctuated based on the day, and a lot of men simply either leave when their enlistments are up, or they just leave when it's time to plant crops. The troops are also poorly trained because there's a lack of really qualified officers. And, Washington, frankly, he understood the importance of using the terrain to his advantage, but he wanted to beat the British using traditional tactics. And, the militia will be beneficial to winning this war, but Washington really is going to be distrustful of them for a long time, and it's going to take the winter at Valley Forge before he comes around. So there's a lot of things that Washington really has to get over before we experience some serious success. Now, keep in mind that we've got the Declaration of Independence, and while they were voting on it, word reached the Congress that here come the British and New York City is the target. And Britain's war machine really responded to Bunker Hill and the American efforts at independence by assembling the largest armada to ever cross the Atlantic Ocean by this point. And we're talking 400 ships manned by 10,000 sailors, carrying 32,000 soldiers in July. And the next month, an additional 12,000 Hessians, or German-speaking troops, would arrive. Washington rode out in April to gather his defenses, but the island was actually too difficult to defend given its geography, and the Continentals ultimately met with defeat. Unfortunately, the highlight of this Battle of New York is going to be a massive retreat across the East River, where the colonials kept their unmanned fires burning to confuse the British patrols, and Washington himself didn't even cross until all of his men were accounted for. Now, New York is going to fall, and New York City is going to be a safe haven for British sympathizers from 1776 pretty much till the end of the war. This is also where Britain's officers are going to conduct much of their strategy during the war. So this year, 1776, begins with Common Sense. Smack in the middle, we have the Declaration, and then in the fall, we have the loss of one of the largest cities in the colonies. Now, following the fall of New York, the British are marching towards Philadelphia to capture the Continental Congress, so the Hessian soldiers wintered in New Jersey. Now, we say this phrase, wintered. This is still at a time when the fighting pretty much takes place in spring, summer, and fall. And once the snow flies, the goal is to stay warm until you can start fighting again in the spring. Now, by this time, Congress had abandoned Pennsylvania and fled to Baltimore. Now, due to the short enlistment terms and many expiring enlistments of his troops, Washington only had till the end of the year to give the troops a reason to stay. Thomas Paine published what was called the Crisis at this time, with the famous phrase, "These are the times that try men's souls." He does this to invigorate the troops, and he even traveled behind enemy lines to find a printer in Philadelphia that would publish this work. Now it says the crossing of the Delaware River, Christmas night, 1776. Washington split his troops into 4 units to cross the river at different points, and they had horses. They had 400 tons of artillery. Snow and sleet delayed the march by several hours, so the Americans didn't even reach Trenton until 4 hours after their intended time. And truthfully, the Hessians, they didn't think that the Americans would mount an attack given the cold and snowy weather. Now, here's a romantic image of what went on here. This is a painting from 1851 called Washington Crossing the Delaware. You can see Washington standing, and you see James Monroe, future president, holding up a Betsy Ross style flag with 5 pointed stars. Now again, inaccuracies within the photo, absolutely. But the point is certainly well taken. The U.S. lost 2 men in the fight. Another 4 or 5 due to exposure in the cold, and Monroe was actually one of the few that got injured. Princeton was taken about a week later on January 2nd, and these battles increased colonial morale. They led to a rise in re-enlistments, and it altered British strategy. Up to this point, they thought they could just kind of cow the Americans into submission, make them realize, hey, you need to just lay off. But after Trenton and Princeton, they realized they would have to completely conquer America if they had any hope of totally winning this war.